All right, well, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Most of us are here in Hilo. How are you guys doing over there, James, and online for Oahu and Maui? Good to go?
Lars.
Looks great. Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Orville Baldos. He's a researcher and professor over at UH Manoa. He's on Manoa campus, and Orville's really great because he focuses on ornamental horticulture, but he's actually got a sustainable ornamental horticulture lab. So he focuses a lot on native plants, on seed dormancy and plant propagation. So Orville's doing a lot to try to bring new native plants into the ornamental horticulture scene. And without further ado, you can take it away, Dr. Baldos.
All right, thanks, Russell, for the introduction. So maybe let's start with ornamental plants. So any of you guys familiar with what ornamental plants are?
What do you guys think? Let's hear it.
Landscaping.
Landscape.
Aren't edible.
Aren't edible? We hear aren't edible is ornamental.
Okay, aren't edible. What else? What's its primary purpose, I guess?
But yeah, what's the primary purpose?
Enjoyment.
Enjoyment, yes. Aesthetics, yes. That's correct. Yeah, so that's basically the primary purpose of ornamental plants. But I don't know if all of you have phones or access to the internet, but maybe let's just give I'll probably do a survey of sorts and see what comes up with what people think of ornamentals. So let me just see how this thing works. So yeah, so there we go. If you have access to the internet, you can go to this website here, menti.com, and then use this code. And then I have about, you can actually put in 10 uses of ornamental plants.
All right, guys, I'm on for us. So
let's see what. Yeah, just to make things interactive at the first part. Okay, I can see shade here. Shade and beauty.
they only let you vote once, Orville.
Only once.
Yeah, unless you sign up. So we weren't signed up. So we'll have other people throw it on there.
Okay, yeah. So maybe 5 minutes. Just put your comments in there. Yeah, so in the chat, there's also contrast. Somebody mentioned contrast in the chat. Okay, fragrances and then spiritual practice. Also, somebody mentioned ground cover.
Happiness. Yeah. There you go. Sound screen. It's almost there with the privacy.
Okay, so what I'm seeing here right now is central word is actually beauty. And yeah, there's more, keeps on changing. All right, I'm also seeing comments in the chat as well. Is everybody done, you think?
We're pretty good to go. That looks like a big old list. We're
Yeah.
getting some doubles in there, so I'd say we've hit most of what we consider ornamental plants to be useful for.
Okay, so let's start and discuss. So first and foremost, you can see beauty is the biggest word here. So yes, so ornamentals are mainly utilized for aesthetics. So the next biggest word would be shade. You have color, oxygen, privacy, joy, variety, aroma, pleasure, and then a couple little words here: ground cover, cultural meaning, visual screen, environmental stability, support of rare plants, garden definition, mood enhancement, food for pollinators, fragrant smells, ecosystem services. Shade for sun, ecosystem services, and habitat are more or less similar concepts. Low maintenance, contrast, food for animals, flower arrangements, promotion of native plant, color arrangement, lay making materials, stormwater interception, aesthetics, love, happiness, good smells, decoration, visual appeal, turf design, enjoyment in many contexts, balance in the ecosystem, architectural enhancement, and property value. So you can see here there's some, it's primarily used for aesthetics, but you can see that there's also a bunch of minor, not really minor, but I think it's also important that they provide other uses such as visual screening. You can also boil things down here by like environmental benefits. What else here? I think there's somebody in terms of the, let's see, the chat. So in the chat, they mentioned contrast, fragrances, spiritual practice, ground cover, habitat for animals and insects, medicinal purposes, attract pollinators. If they're native, they provide the habitat. Keeps fun hobby, sensory stimulation, color, texture, and variety. Grass is so boring. Attract wildlife, bird habitats, and biodiversity. So yeah, so if you boil it down, ornamentals basically give about 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you can boil it down into 4 homeowner association. Oh, okay, homeowners association. Thanks for clearing that out. So you can boil uses of ornamentals in terms of 4 aspects. So ornamentals primarily function for aesthetic purposes. And then you can also see here that they also have functional uses. There's also mention of property value here. So yes, so there's economic benefits also with ornamentals. And there's mention of happiness, love. So there is human and social issues that could be provided by, so benefits that provide, well, human and social issues that can be affected by ornamentals, or ornamentals give us benefits in terms of that area. So let me just share with you this handout, which I'll be sharing later on as a, I'll share with the rest of extension agents, and then they'll forward it to you. Let me share screen. Okay, so basically ornamental plants are utilized for their beauty, symbolic significance, color, fragrance, as well as their therapeutic and emotional value. So for aesthetics, ornamentals carry out themes and evoke changes in seasons. So themes in terms of whether it's an oriental garden, tropical garden, or contemporary garden. So that's the theme aspect. So they have like architectural plantings. They can soften strong lines of buildings and structures, reinforce design elements. So having a plant on both sides of an entrance can frame it. Ornamental plants can add color and texture and add interest and attract people. They draw the eye to certain features. Plantings that are vertical or horizontal lines can lead people to certain places. So if it's a straight line, then it's more of a formal design. People just go straight to a place. If it's more of a curvilinear planting, then it keeps people in there for a little bit longer. So it sort of like makes people relax. So that's drawing the eye to certain features. So aside from that, it can also carry out the principles of design. So color, addition of colorful ornamental plants can help attract people or reinforce themes. Order and unity can also be reinforced by ornamental plants. Rhythm and repetition, balance and harmony, scale and also proportion. And then the combination of these design elements, ornamentals can have function. Somebody mentioned Feng Shui also in the chat. So yes, so that in terms of design, this is based on Chinese. I'm not sure if it's Chinese philosophy, but it's rooted in Chinese garden design. So that's Feng Shui. So there are things that you have to plant or avoid to plant with that. So aside from that, they also create images, fragrance, and well, flower arrangements. That's another thing. Aside from having plants that are planted in a garden, you also have flower arrangements. You give flowers during special occasions. Functional uses. So this is the uses in landscapes and also in other uses. So screen noise, bad views on neighbors, direct foot traffic, hide utility. So you can have hedges to hide your trash cans or plumbing or electrical. Some ornamental plants are dual purpose. So some can be edible. So if so some flowers can be eaten. And then some, like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with pakalana. Pakalana is actually, well, it's used as a lay plant here in Hawaii, but in Asia, particularly in southern China and Southeast Asia, flowers of Pacalana is actually eaten as a vegetable. So yeah, so they can also be eaten in certain cases. So it also directs view or line of sight. In terms of environmental uses, so it can be for conservation purposes. Ornamentals increase biodiversity in a certain place, provides habitat for fauna. It also can convey cultural meaning, so convey certain ideas about cultures. It conveys a sense of place. So cultural plant arts like bonsai, ikebana, and lei. In Asia, banyan trees have religious or even supernatural connotations with it. So it for example, in the Philippines or in Southeast Asia, banyan trees are believed to inhabit spiritual entities like earth elements or that sort of thing. Also, like plumeria in Hawaii, it's used as a lay flower, but in other places, it's a graveyard flower. Tuberose in Hawaii is a lay flower, but in parts of Asia, it's used as a funeral flower. And then lotus flowers in Asia, it's considered as a religious symbol. So it has importance in Hinduism and also Buddhism. So ornamental plants can convey these cultural aspects. And in terms of economic benefits, so somebody mentioned property value. So landscaped areas with ornamentals can increase property values, enhance the environment of buildings by reducing heat load and enhancing cooling. In shopping malls, like Ala Moana Center, they have gardens in the middle of the shopping center or shopping district that enhances the shopping experience. So making people, so they allow people to spend a little bit more time there, and spending a little bit more time there would probably equate to having people spend more, buying more stuff. So aside from that, it also enhances attractions like zoos, botanical gardens, and it's also a source of livelihood. So there is in Hawaii we have an ornamental industry. We have people who are in the landscape industry, so they're nursery industry, so they depend on ornamentals as their source of livelihood. We also have farmers who grow cut flowers and cut foliage like dendrobium and anthuriums, proteas. So they depend on these crops as as a source of livelihood. And then on a smaller scale, there are companies that rent out plants or house plants to office spaces. So that's another economic value. So as plantings, they improve environments by providing shade, wind protection, screen privacy, noise mitigation, and enhanced views. They absorb air pollutants and carbon dioxide and produce oxygen, phytoremediation of organic compounds. So if you've heard about the houseplants absorbing different VOCs of volatile organic compounds, so they can help reduce those pollutants. Plantings can also enhance scenic views, also reduce erosion, and then street plantings can provide a variety of functions. In terms of human and social issues, they can improve physical well-being and mental health, basically making people happy. Gardens can be a form of, or gardening can be a form of relaxation for homeowners. In certain cases, if you have houseplants in your office, that can reduce the sick building syndrome. Ornamentals can also reduce stress, lower blood pressure, and reduce muscle tension. If you have a combination of water and then a garden, that instills tranquility. So there are hospitals that are like, there was an example that I mentioned in class this semester about the hospital in Singapore, wherein they integrate the garden into the hospital. So there's the central part of the hospital is an open courtyard that's full of tropical plants. So that those gardens can help people heal better in the hospitals. So aside from that, they also improve a sense of community and social interaction, and also reduce crime. So there are examples like America in Bloom in terms of, so people plant ornamentals in these communities. There's also beautification programs in Europe and Canada, and there are installations in various towns, villages, cities, business districts. So I also mentioned, I've already mentioned recovery from surgery and illness and therapy. All right, so those are the, I guess not all of the benefits, but those are just examples of how ornamentals can be beneficial other than being planted for beauty. Yeah. Any questions on this first part?
We've got one over here. What was that sick building syndrome that you mentioned?
So sick building syndrome is, imagine you're in an office space with no windows and just white paint and just gray. So that's more of, I guess, psychologically you feel you don't feel welcome, or it's a very sterile environment. So that's what sick building syndrome is. Any other questions? Additional questions?
We're silent over in Hilo.
Okay. Kalani mentioned that, yeah, plant rentals are often wanted for events. Then another mention here, plus air quality in the office is bad. Yes, so that's correct. So that's another part of the sick building syndrome, is that the air quality is bad. Usually humidity is low, and air just basically circulates inside, so there's no fresh air. Yes. All right, so if there's no other questions, let's head on to the next presentation. So now you know what uses and what the uses or what ornamentals provide. Let me just show you a brief, not really brief, but actually this is like an hour-long lecture on the origins of ornamental plants. So where do ornamental plants come from?
Just for your reference, we normally take a break at 10 for about 10 minutes. So I'll
okay.
And sorry for the interruption if I do.
Yeah. So just let me know. Okay. Interrupt me.
Okay.
Yeah. When it's 10 o'clock. Okay. All right. Maybe I'll just share computer sound and optimize video clip, although this doesn't have any video clips anyway. All right. So this presentation is actually based on a book, which I can show you the reference book later on. So if you're interested in buying that book and then just reading the whole thing, it's a very interesting topic. So here in Hawaii, we equate these plants, yeah. So, well, mostly the tourists equate Hawaii with these plants. So we have coconuts, plumeria, Antheriums, birds of paradise, and dendrobiums.
Red ginger.
And red ginger, yes. But actually, all of these are introduced. So they come from somewhere else in the world. Antheriums are actually native to northern Mexico through Central America to southern Brazil and the Caribbean. And then plumerias are actually native to the Caribbean, Central America, Mexico, and parts of South America, like the northern parts of South America. Bird of paradise is indigenous to South Africa. And then dendrobiums are native, so they're a big family or big genus. So they're located from like southern Japan all the way through Taiwan, southern China, Southeast Asia, Indonesia, northern Australia, some of the Pacific Islands, and New Guinea and the Philippines. So that's the native range of dendrobiums. And then it's a small text here. So coconuts are actually native to tropical and subtropical regions of the world except for Hawaii. So ornamentals, the ornamentals plants that we have today comes from different parts of the world. So as we've talked about, ornamentals have a bunch of uses to us humans, and we actually have been well connected to plants. We have a long history. So we have used ornamentals to celebrate occasions. So we bring flowers, or we present plants as gifts, and we also grow these plants for beauty and function. The earliest records of ornamentals being used has been recorded in this cave in Iraq. And they found that Neanderthals were, so these are like early humans, so Neanderthals, they've used flowers for medicinal purposes and also for sympathy floral design. So basically they offer these flowers to the dead. So they found these pollen clusters in these burial caves. So that's the earliest use of plants as ornamentals. In ancient times, like in ancient Egypt, ornamentals have been used in their gardens. They've also been used in floral arrangements in tables and also for personal adornments. The popular plants at that time were the following. So you have papyrus, which is not only used also as ornamentals, but it was used as paper, right? So the ancient Egyptians were one of those first people to use, I guess, paper using papyrus. Okay. Other popular plants include gladiolus, poppies, water lily, roses, chrysanthemum, and crocus. The earliest record of ornamental plant imports was done by Queen Hatshepsut. So what she did was she sent emissaries to Somalia, so present-day Somalia, to import 31 frankincense trees. So this is a frankincense tree over here. Thutmose III also imported plants to create a Syrian garden in Egypt. Now let's go to East Asia and India. So in Asia, chrysanthemums have been cultivated back 5,000 years. It was initially utilized for medicine and then eventually used for aesthetics for flowers. In ancient China, the popular flowers were camellias, asters, irises, peonies, lilies, rose, narcissus, and also lotus. So the lotus was introduced to China from India when Buddhism spread from India to East Asia. In Korea, so the chrysanthemum was actually gifted by the Koreans to Japan in 385 AD, and the Japanese have what do you call this? Adopted chrysanthemum as their symbol of the symbol of their royalty. So you've heard of the chrysanthemum throne, yeah. And in the Japanese passport, you can see the chrysanthemum flower as one of the symbols of Japan. Let's go to ancient Greece. So in ancient Greece, the plants have been used as wreaths or chaplets, and these were awarded to the heroes of the arts, sciences, and aesthetics. In ancient Greece, they incorporated a lot of herbs because they wanted fragrance in their wreaths and chaplets. Color was not as important with the ancient Greeks. Popular flowers in ancient Greece include the lily, the honeysuckle, the rose, the tulip, larkspur, violet, and then the hyacinth. Cornucopia here also shows you some flowers in there. So cornucopia is the symbol of abundance in ancient Greece. And then in ancient Rome, so this was a civilization that started also with their neighbors. So they have Egyptian and also Greek influences. So ancient Rome continued these influences in their wreath and garland traditions, but they focused on having brighter colors and also fragrance in their wreaths. So they added rose petals and other fragrant flowers to perfume banquets, and they also have a day to commemorate the dead, and Rosa Tionis is actually the root word. Well, the root word would be rose, so it has a floral aspect to it. So that's the a brief history or a brief overview of what plants were popular in ancient times. So now let's go to the meat of the, I guess, the book, which focuses on ornamental plant use and migrations in Britain. So the focus of the book was actually how plants moved from other places into Britain. And it can be roughly divided into three periods. So you have the 1200s to 1600s, medieval to early modern period, 1580s to 1820s, the American period, and then the 1760s to the present Asia Southern Hemisphere period. You notice that there is some overlaps in between these periods. So it's not, I guess the author didn't have like a specific date, but there are overlaps in between these periods of time.
To interrupt, Orville.
Yes.
Would you mind resharing without video optimization? Because we found it makes the text really blurry.
Oh, okay. Let me stop share and redo the share. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. How's that? Let's see.
Better, thank you.
Better. Okay. So let's go to the first wave of ornamental or plant migrations into Britain. Let's see what there's somebody. Oh, can you make the screen larger? Maybe if I do this, is that better? Now it's
better.
okay. Sorry, it's now it's full screen. I made it full screen.
Somewhat. I mean, the lettering is just small, unfortunately.
Okay. Right. So 1200s to 1600s, medieval to early modern period. So initially, monasteries grew plants from other places as medicine. So the apothecary rose was one of those introductions into Britain. With the Norman invasion of England, they brought with them these plants, so lavender, carnation, wallflowers, and lilies. In 1096 to 1272, the Crusades period, the anemones were brought into Britain. And then in the 1100s, hen and chicks, calendula, wall germander, hyssop, and black mulberry were introduced into Britain. In the 1200s to 1300s, so these imports came from Asia Minor or the part of Asia that's closest to Europe. So they imported crocus, sweet rocket, hollyhock, roses, and Italian cypress into Britain. So Italian cypress came from Italy. So these were the plant imports during this period of time, 1200s to 1600s. The second wave of plants coming into Britain is the American period. So during this time, the New World was, I wouldn't say discovered, but they landed on the New World, and that resulted in the flux of plants from the New World, and also the plants coming in from the Old World, like Europe, came to the Americas. So that was, I guess you can call that the Great American Exchange. I think there was a term that says something like that. So during this period, there were still some influx of plants from Russia, Eastern Europe, and Turkey. And then you have the early North and South American introductions. So introductions from Russia and Eastern Europe included snowdrops, Turk's cap lily, the Lebanon cedar, and also the tulip. So the tulip was the symbol of, well, it's still a symbol of the Netherlands. And in that period of time, it was a symbol of wealth. So it was a status symbol. So people were collecting tulips, and the more rare the tulips are, the more expensive it is. And the most expensive tulip was the Semper Augustus. So this was this flower here that had specks of white and red. And little did they know at that time, Semper Augustus was actually caused by a virus. So there was a tulip color break virus that made this sort of tulip. So there was a mania with tulips in the Netherlands, and there was an economic bubble. So the value of the tulips keep rising and rising, and then it peaked and burst in 1637. And in Britain, the tulips were imported from the Netherlands via Flanders by Huguenot weavers. The early North and South American introductions at this period were the following. So nasturtiums were imported into Britain. Sunflower, which is native to North America, was also imported. You also have the yucca, French and African marigolds from Mexico, the plumeria from the Caribbean, and also Dahlia from Mexico was imported into Britain. In the 1700s, there was a waning of introductions from Eastern Europe and Western Asia, and then the North American plant exchange peaked at that time. In the 1800s, introductions from North America waned, and during this period of time, there were botanical explorations around the world. So a few notable botanists who described or discovered plants or described newly described plants in science was David Douglas and Archibald Menzies. So David Douglas is named after the Douglas fir, and he found or described about 670 species from California. Archibald Menzies is another botanist who described the monkey puzzle tree from South America in the 1790s and also found the giant redwood trees of California during that time. So both of these botanists actually had Hawaii connections because they have traveled into Hawaii at a certain period of their life. David Douglas actually died in Hawaii. He died on the Big Island. If you go to like the Hakalau Forest Reserve, I think that there is a marker that still stands there today, where the marks where he died. So he actually died by, I think, falling into I'm not sure if it's some sort of trap for animals. So he died there, and he was buried temporarily in Honolulu in Kauai Ha'o Church before his remains were transferred back to Britain. Menzies also went here and did some botanical research. And if you are familiar with some of the native plants, there are some species that has Menziesii in their species name. So that those species or those Hawaiian species were named after Archibald Menzies. So let's go to the third wave of plant movement into Britain. So this is the 1760s. Yes, so the Hawaiian abutilon named after Menzies. Yes, so Abutilon menziesii, correct. Yes. So let's go to the third wave of ornamental migration or plant migration into Britain. So this is the Asia Southern Hemisphere period. So during this period, Britain had a bunch of colonies already established a bunch of colonies in Australia, some parts of Asia, also parts of Africa. And plants were being imported or brought from these colonies back to Britain. So during this period, there are a bunch of plants that came from South Asia, and then you have Chinese and Japanese plants, and also a bunch of plants from different parts of the world. So plants were, the import of plants into Britain accelerated with the invention of the Wardian case. So the Wardian case is basically a mini greenhouse. So it's a greenhouse made out of glass, and this made it possible to transport tender plants or plants that are sensitive to salt spray from faraway places, because during that time there were no airplanes yet, so people were traveling by ships, and these Wardian cases protected the plants from salt sprays. So during this period, South Asian plants that were brought into Britain included the oleander, rhododendrons, which came from Nepal, Tibet area. Kahili ginger also from that part of the world, Nepal, southern India, northern India. You also have the banyan tree, and then Amherstia, which is a plant with pink pendulous flowers imported from present-day Burma or Myanmar. And then there's a bunch of Chinese and Japanese introductions, like the Singapore rhododendron, which is a tropical, not really a rhododendron. Botanically, it's more of a melastome. It's related to Medinilla. So that was imported into Britain. Also, the Hoya or the wax plants. The first collections of hydrangea or hortensia was actually done in a Japanese temple, and then brought to Britain. Then you also have the sago or the Japanese sago palm, which is native to the southern Japanese islands. You also have the Chinese arbor vitae, and also the heavenly bamboo was imported. And then in the second half of the 19th century, you have these plants moved to Britain. So you have the bunya pine from Australia, jacaranda from Brazil, Norfolk Island pine from Norfolk Island in the Pacific, kauri, which is agathis is the genus, came from New Zealand. The first collections of petunia, so this is a wild petunia, so it's very, very different from the modern day petunia. So petunias are native to Argentina. So one of the first collections of petunias were done in the 19th century. Then you also have a bird of paradise, Pelargonium, gladiolus, and aloe from South Africa. And then in Mexico, you have a bunch of cosmos. So these are now staples in gardens. So you have cosmos, zinnias, marigolds, and salvias were imported from Mexico. And then other South American plants that were imported at this period of time. So this is the monkey puzzle tree that Archibald Menzies described from South America. Passion flowers, so the first collection of passion flowers were done during this time. And banana poca, which is an invasive plant here in Hawaii, was also imported from South America into Britain. In the late 1800s to before World War II, more collections were done, and particularly orchids. So during this time, there was orchid mania. So people were, orchids became a status symbol at that time as well. So the more rare it is, then the more expensive it is. So a lot of plant explorers were looking for rare species from different parts of the world. And then in the 1890s to the early 1900s, the United States began importing plants from different parts of the world to increase their economic ability. So David Fairchild is one of those pioneers in terms of importing economically important plants into the United States. So he was handling the Office of Foreign Seed and Plant Introduction of the Bureau of Plant Introductions of the USDA, or United States Department of Agriculture. Joseph Rock, who was a UH professor, also did some expeditions in Southeast Asia and was one of the first to collect the Chalmuga tree. Any of you guys familiar with the Chalmuga tree? And
yes.
Why is the Chalmuga tree important?
Because the oil could be used to make a treatment for leprosy or Hansen's disease.
Correct. Yes. So So Joseph Rock was could be credited to bringing the Chalmuga tree into Hawaii and doing the research here to find a cure for leprosy. And Alice Ball was actually the chemist. So she was the first African American, I think, graduate student of UH, and she discovered a way to extract these oils as a treatment for leprosy. So yeah, so that's why the Chalmuga tree is important in Hawaii. I think we still have the Chalmuga tree. I'm not sure if that's the original tree that's planted. Correct me if I'm wrong. There is one that's planted in front of Bachman Hall in the UH campus. So aside from that, he also prepared a flora of Hawaii. So he was one of the first people to compile a list of what's native here in Hawaii. Then another plant explorer, Frank Meyer, collected plants from the East. So he is credited into introducing the Chinese blue column juniper, zoysia grass, which is one of our commonly used turf grass in Hawaii. So this came from Asia. And then he is named after, the Meyer lemon, so the lemons that you buy from the supermarkets, is named after this guy here. And then another person who was important at that time was Charles Sprague Sargent. So he also did some expeditions to East Asia and Japan, and was interested in trees and their value to society. So from World War II to the present day, collections of plants were winding down because of the institution of the Convention on International Trade for Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. So that was instituted by the different countries, and that increased regulations into importing plants from different places. Because at that time, probably this was in the 1800s, you can see people were just collecting plants, wild plants. These are most likely wild plants, not Paphiopedilums, but Phalaenopsis schilleriana kept coming in from the Philippines. So this was a shipment of orchids into San Francisco. So this was done at the time where there were no regulations with plant imports. So in summary, with origins of garden plants in the US, so most of the garden plants that we grow today come from Asia, so with 1,878 species. And then next would be European species, about 1,222. We also have 1,122 species from North America. Then you have some from Africa, South America, Mexico, Australia, and New Zealand. So this was calculated from this book here of the American Horticultural Society, A to Z Encyclopedia of Garden Plants. Maybe let's take a break before we continue.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay.
10 minutes. Yep.
All right, 10 minutes.
Thank you, Orville. Yeah. All right, we're pretty much ready to go. How about you guys over in Kauai and over on Oahu, Maui? Ready to go?
Echo here.
Okie dokie. Dr. Baldos, we can get started again if you are there.
All right.
Cool.
Let me just share screen again. All right, so part 2 of the origins of ornamentals. So we looked at global migrations into Britain. Let's look at plant migrations into Hawaii. So try to search for records or histories of plant materials that were imported into Hawaii, particularly ornamentals. So early plant introductions in Hawaii can be divided into 2 areas. So you have the Polynesian period and then the early European period. So during the Polynesian period, so the Polynesians brought with them the canoe plants. So canoe plants from central Polynesia were brought into Hawaii at different times. These were used for food, medicine, wood, and also cordage. Some of these plants were also associated with Polynesian gods. So one of the first plants or the first settlers brought into Hawaii were taro, sugarcane, and bamboo. And these were associated with the god Kane. The second wave of migration into Hawaii brought with them banana from the Society Islands. And this is associated with the god Kanaloa. And then you also have sweet potato and ipu, which was brought by the third wave. And then you also have the latecomers, which imported breadfruit and coconut into Hawaii. What's interesting, so this is just like a side note on how plants came into Hawaii. So this interesting figure here sort of supports the theory that the Polynesians actually landed in South America and brought back with them the sweet potato. So there is linguistic and genetic evidence that points to this ancestry. Because when you look at linguistically, so the Hawaiians call it uwala, yeah, sweet potato is uwala. And in parts of South America, it's called kuala or umala. Kumara, kumar, kumal, kumal, and kumal. And you can see in the Pacific, most of the Pacific, the word is more or less similar here, even in New Zealand. And so that may indicate that the sweet potato was probably brought by the Polynesians from South America. And then you can also see here how the word for sweet potato was influenced in the Philippines by the Mexican galleon trade. So in Mexico, it's called camote or camotil. And in the Mariana Islands and in the Philippines, which were part of the Spanish colony at that time, they call the sweet potato camote. And then in New Guinea and Timor, which was a Portuguese colony, they call the sweet potato batata or patatas. So yeah, so this is just some evidence of genetic evidence of the sweet potato that came to Hawaii, the Hawaiian varieties as South American introductions. So that was the early, the Polynesian period. And then in the early European period, so this was at the time wherein Captain James Cook landed in Hawaii, and that started the use of Hawaii as a important port of call. So yeah, so January 1778, Captain James Cook lands at Waimea Harbor in Kauai. And then after European contact, Hawaii became an important port of call in the Pacific, sort of like a pit stop because it's in the middle of the Pacific between Asia and the Americas. So during this time, a number of expeditions were launched to describe Hawaiian flora. So this is when Archibald Menzies and David Douglas went to Hawaii and did their botanizing on the islands. And then during this time, plant introductions into Hawaii also accelerated because of European contact. So one of the important people who introduced plants into Hawaii was this guy. So his name is Francisco de Paula Marin. He's the king's financial advisor, winemaker, physician, and farmer. So he introduced a number of food crops, including prickly pear cactus, the European olive, and if you've been to Foster Botanical Gardens, there is a section, or there's a shelter or a hall that has his exhibit on it, because if you're familiar with Vineyard Boulevard, so Vineyard Boulevard was once the vineyard of Hawaii, the Hawaiian royalty. So Paula de Marin was one of those people who were tending the vineyards and importing these plants. So in 1819 to 1839, there were a number of introduced ornamentals into Hawaii. So this includes the spider flower, Kikaniale, moonflowers, the dragon tree, the pride of Barbados, or Ohai Ali'i, the balloon vine, common canna, the calabash tree, China berry or neem, and then the tropic ageratum, which is a weed now. So within 60 years of Captain Cook's arrival into Hawaii, about 15 ornamental plants have been introduced into Hawaii. So in the late 1800s, there were some important introductions that were made into Hawaii. So this include the plumeria. So this is between the 1860s and 1900s. The monkey pod tree, which is it's a very utilized street tree now. It was introduced in 1866. The Antherium was introduced in 1889 and was, I think, it was brought in by one of those wealthy people and as like a hobby plant. And then eventually in the 50s, I'm not sure if it's in the 50s or 40s, UH started the breeding program for Anthuriums, and it still runs today. And then in 1896, the Honohono orchid was also introduced into Hawaii. So I think that's the end of this lecture here. Any questions on the history and origins of ornamental plants?
Are there any native Hawaiian ornamental plants?
There are. So I can give you one example in the presentation that I'll show with what I'm doing.
Then we have another question from here.
Which island has the oldest monkey pots?
Which island has the oldest still standing monkey pod tree?
That I am not sure.
What 1900s?
Are there any, like super old ones that you know of?
out.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's I honestly I don't know. I haven't I don't know if there's old ones if there are trees in Foster that can date back to like the 1800s. There might be.
Definitely Moana Lua on Oahu's got old monkey pods. I think you're gonna find a lot on Oahu.
Yeah.
I would say Foster's and maybe Lion Arboretum also.
Yeah. So there was some mention in the chat about Haulico. Yes, Haulico was introduced. I'm not sure was it introduced. I think it might have been introduced as a revegetation species, not really as an ornamental. So
Yeah, probably more introduced as for its uses, with like cattle feed and that.
Actually, it was introduced for firewood because they were burning all the native trees, and native trees don't grow back. So a priest introduced it, and the original main stump is, I forgot what Catholic church in town has a plaque for the original stump.
Oh, okay. All right, thanks for that info. All right, so if there's no other questions here, let me just give you, let's do a virtual field trip to Mexico. Since we're talking about history and origins of ornamentals. Okay, where's the share screen? Share screen, there we go. So in 2019, I had the opportunity to go to Mexico and present at this international symposium on new ornamental plants. And so this was sponsored by the ISHS, or the International Society for Horticultural Sciences. So I attended these conferences, and we kind of talked about, well, the group talked about different topics such as genetic conservation, genetic resources, conservation of ornamental plants, how to access these genetic resources now that you have these rules and regulations like the Convention for Biological Diversity, CITES, and also the Nagoya Protocol. Somebody from Denmark also gave a talk on indigenous bedding plants in Europe, and some usage of indigenous bedding plants in Denmark. And then the Mexican the Mexican group also presented on some of their more famous native plants in Mexico. So Euphorbia pulcherrima, or the poinsettia, is actually native to Mexico. And they mentioned that actually the ancient Mexicans, or I think Aztecs maybe, used the poinsettia as a medicine. So they actually looked at it as to increase breastfeeding in mothers, so because it has that sap in them. They also used it as a cure for cutaneous infections, for various skin infections. In Mexico, they also eat the bracts of poinsettia. So they contain a bunch of resins, flavonoids, pigments, starch, glucose, gallic acid, and tartaric acid. Here is an interesting photo of a slide that I took, which showcases different types of dishes in Taxco, Guerrero state in Mexico that uses bracts of poinsettia. And then, as I mentioned, Dahlia Dahlia actually came from Mexico. So there was some talk on how Dahlia, research on Dahlia as an ornamental and also as for other purposes. So Dahlia in Mexico was used as food, medicine, and also as a garden plant before the Spanish arrived. So in ancient pottery here, you can see that there's a symbol of dahlias in their ancient pottery. And then they're talking about dahlia selections for particular purposes like ornamentals, also for medicine and also for food. So tubers of dahlia are actually edible. So they did like a chemical composition or nutritional composition of the different species of dahlia in terms of protein, fiber, and inulin. Inulin, I don't know if you know, is an important, I think it's a fiber that helps support digestion. So this is a picture of different uses of dahlia as food. So you can eat the petals and you can eat the tubers. And this slide shows you how this research is benefiting the indigenous groups of people in Mexico, so that the dahlia is reintroduced and it becomes a source of income for these indigenous groups. So what I did there was I presented a talk and also a paper on Jack Montia, which is Pauhiaka here in Hawaii. So aside from presenting what I did, we went outside of Guadalajara and looked at native plants outside. So we passed through houses and fields of corn. So corn, as you know, corn is a staple crop of Mexico. And Guadalajara or Jalisco state is also home to tequila. So you can see we passed through various fields of agave, which is used also as an ornamental, but in this state, it's used primarily for tequila production. So we did a stopover at one of those salt flats wherein you can see various native plants that can withstand very salty conditions. And then we went uphill to this place called Tapalpa, and we saw the wild species of tagetes or marigold. So this is the wild marigold. And then we were toured by this indigenous guide around. So we were very high up on the mountain. So this was probably like, I would say maybe 7,000 feet elevation. So on that hike, we saw this kind of looks like a mint in the mint family. If you're familiar with Talansias or air plants, so Talansias are actually native to Mexico. So this is their wild habitat. You can see they're just sticking on growing on top of trunks of trees. I don't know if you can see it clearly, but if you're familiar with Peles hair or Tillandsia usnioides, Spanish moss. So Spanish moss is also native to Mexico. You can see that the Spanish moss is just dangling on top of trees here in the forest. And then I saw a wild salvia, which is probably a progenitor or one of those early parents of the modern day hybrid salvias. These are also the blue There are salvias that are like bluish purplish in color. More close-up view of wild salvia species. Then we went down to this stream, looking for more plants. Some went even down. I didn't go down. It was too steep. Then I saw this succulent-looking plant here. Might be a potential ornamental. Then we went back up from the creek into this flower field. As you can see here, marigolds just grow wild in these fields. And then we saw this field of cosmos. So cosmos is one of those garden plants. So this is a species of cosmos that I guess the farmer just grew it. And then people are just taking pictures of the field. Then we went to this historic town of Tapalpa, so one of those
That might be us. Yeah, we're kind of losing a little bit of internet connectivity here. Okay.
Or false headers. So you can see Copeas and Tagitis together in this field, and then the cosmos also was growing wild. This is Iringium. So it's similar to the Iringiums that are used for cut flowers, but I don't think this Mexican one is used for cut flowers at all. I just saw it, that was interesting. Then another Dahlia that's opened, fully open. That's the entrance to that rock formation. All right, so that's a virtual field trip to Mexico. Any questions? No questions?
Well, there's
Yes.
a question here about toxicity of poinsettia. You know a lot about that? I've heard rumors. I don't know a good scientific background for it.
So it's not actually toxic to humans. So the poinsettias are, so that's a myth, I guess, or misnomer. So poinsettias are not actually toxic. So you can see that they're eaten by the indigenous people of Mexico. So I can't see that it's toxic if it's eaten by them.
Thank you.
So there was a question, do people often prospect for future ornamentals? Yes. So so there is still some bioprospecting going on, but it's on a limited basis, and they also follow strict rules. So there was, I encountered one talk in that conference wherein they, if you're familiar with impatiens, the bedding plant, so there is this company called Sakata. Sakata is one of those big seed companies who are not only breeding ornamentals, but they're also known for breeding vegetables. So they partnered with the government of Indonesia because there are indigenous or native or endemic, even endemic impatiens in Indonesia that have probably some particular traits that they have that could be bred into the modern day impatiens. So they worked with the government of Indonesia to have access to those plants as breeding stock, and in return, part of the sales that were generated from the new cultivars of impatiens were given to the government of Indonesia. So yeah, so there was a question about wild dahlia. Yes, so the dahlia was actually already selected by the ancient or the indigenous people there. So there was probably some improvement going on with the dahlia, but those are the pictures that I showed you are the non-improved ones, the wild looking species. There was another question: what characteristics are people looking for in ornamentals? So in terms of current breeding trends with ornamentals, the breeders, well, aside from having a different color, so that's always the case. So people are always on the lookout for different colors, for something different. Breeders are looking for compactness, so how small the plant is, or how branching it is, or the floriferousness, or how many flowers does it have. More traits that are being looked at right now by breeders that may not have value for consumers is that they're looking for plants right now that are naturally compact and doesn't need any chemical growth growth regulators in them. So that's more of like in the sustainability part of things with ornamentals. So they're looking at characteristics that would help them apply less pesticides or less growth regulators, and also less water. So they're looking at those characteristics right now in their breeding programs. Okay, so what plants are good for indoor balcony in shady conditions? So we can talk about that, I think, there's another slideshow that I'll be showing on common house plants or common plants in Hawaii. So any other questions on this virtual field trip? No other questions?
We're good. Yeah.
Okay, you're good in Hilo. Okay. We'll try to answer some of your questions in the chat later on. Yeah. All right, so let me just fix some things here before we go on to the next topic. So the next talk I'll be presenting a little bit about what I do in terms of research. If you're curious as to what sort of research topics or research areas I do, and maybe that's good enough, I think. Okay. Share screen. Right. This is just a brief introduction about what I do at UH Manoa in terms of my research on ornamentals. So my focus is mainly right now on looking at native plants as ornamental for various ornamental use. So that's my primary focus of research, but I'm also interested in other research areas like trying to introduce non-invasive, non-native or introduced species for ornamental use. So that may be used for like maybe cut flower, cut foliage, or as a landscape plant or as an ornamental plant. In addition to that, I'm also interested in looking at sustainable practices in ornamental production. So today I will be talking about my research on native ornamentals. So why use native plants as ornamentals? So in recent years, the use of natives in landscaping has been gaining popularity both locally and also in the national level. People are now looking at other stuff other than aesthetics. So people are concerned with water use or conservation, trying to conserve biodiversity, trying to prevent the spread of invasive species, also trying to handle stormwater management, and people are looking for plants that would serve as habitats for pollinators and other wildlife. So that's why native plants are also being are increasingly being demanded or being used in the United States. So aside from that, another important reason why we use native plants, why we want to use native plants as ornamentals, is we want to create a sense of place. So in the lecture that I showed you, so tourists actually have a misnomer, or they don't, their sense of place is mostly introduced ornamental. So I know that the state is also trying to change that by promoting more natives. So hopefully, when natives become popular here, then people will equate Hawaii with the native plants that we have. So there was a survey by the American Society of Landscape Architects in 2018, and they found in residential areas that native plants were demanded by consumers a lot. So that's about 83.3%. That's followed by drought-tolerant plants and then low-maintenance landscapes. So as you can see that, yes, there is a growing demand for these plants. Here in Hawaii, the promotion and use of native Hawaiian plants has increased in the last 30 years, and we expect the demand to increase in the next 20 years because of a revised law called Act 23315 relating to Hawaiian plants. And this law puts a little bit more teeth into the implementation of native plants by setting targets in terms of how much a composition of a landscape is for state-funded landscaping projects. So this state law aims to increase native plant footprint, the native plant footprint from 10% by 2019 to about 35% by 2030. Some of the bottlenecks with the use of native plants in native Hawaiian plants is that there is a lack of availability of native plants, and there's also a lack of variety with native plants, and also more horticultural information is needed, particularly some of those non-common species. Right now, there is little to no development of selections for ornamental use with native Hawaiian plants. Okay. So native Hawaiian plants have been, there are like a handful of native Hawaiian plants that have been used as ornamentals outside of Hawaii. So this is one example of a native Hawaiian plant that's used as an indoor plant in the Netherlands or in Europe. Let me just share the sound.
This is our Hawaii palm, one of our premium products. We're very proud together with the IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, we preserve this plant. The plant is extinct. There are only 2 plants now available in nature, naturally existing. We help IUCN to replant the plant in Hawaii, the original place. In Holland, we multiply the plant. We produce the seeds ourselves because the plant can't. There is the insect which pollinates the plant is finished. It's no longer existing in Hawaii, and so we imitate nature and we produce the seeds here in Holland, and we multiply the plants. And you can see we have plenty of them. This plant is available year-round, with the exception of May, June, July. And why is that? In that period, our day length is too long. The plant gets too much light, and as a reaction, it drops its leaves. Dropping of the leaf is normal because the plant grows by that way. So all the scars you see over here are just of dropped leaves, and the plant can grow over 4 meters. It's really a beautiful, type. But of course, for in the house, this is a nice size, and the plant is very nice in the garden. Of course, not winter hardy, so you have to take it back in the winter period. But keep it in a sunny place, and keep in mind that the months of May, June, July are difficult for the plant because he will drop his leaf. You think, oh dear, my plant is gone. Put it more in a shady place, and you have no problems. The Hawaii palm.
So yeah, so this is a price that I saw probably maybe like 3 years ago. So they were selling it at Logis. I'm not sure if they're selling it anymore. So it's about $40 for a Brigham insignis plant. Here is another Hawaiian plant that's being marketed in the mainland United States as a bedding plant.
Hey, Ellen.
What now, Chris?
Around the roulette wheel where it stops. I know, on this Artemisia, and this is called Makana Silver. Now, what's interesting about this one, Ellen, is where it comes from.
Hawaii.
Yes, it does. And you know how we know that? Well, first off, the name is Makana. You know what Makana means?
I do. I wrote it down. Handsome and strong.
Thank you very much. But what does Makana mean? Oh, I thought you were talking about me. Oh, it's the plant. Never mind. No, this is actually an Artemisia Mauiensis. It is a Hawaiian plant. Grows very large, 18 by 18 in size.
Mound of fluff.
That's a mound of fluff. Yeah. Very drought tolerant. Let me just pull this. This is just a cool plant. This could be a component plant in mixed combos. It could be a standalone in just a nice pot because you want to go by and touch it. You grow it up as a standard.
Only needs one pinch as well.
Yeah, so look how beautifully it would play with these heucheras here. The contrast. So that's Artemisia Makana Silver. So that is just a playground full of fun here at Terra Nova Nurseries of 2000, California. What trials is this?
Artemisia
I don't know.
trials.
Artemisia trials? I guess so.
So Terra Nova is the nursery that is selling the Artemisia, this Mauiensis. So it's a they were able to select, I guess, a plant that would have like good vigor that could be used as a garden plant. So I haven't checked whether they have it in stock and how much it is. So yeah, so those are just examples of native Hawaiian plants that have been successful outside of Hawaii. But unfortunately, we're not really benefiting from it. So what I am doing here at UH is we're trying to collect, select, and evaluate non-endangered and underutilized species for different purposes. So we can use it as a landscape plant or as a potted plant, or even as cut foliage or as an indoor house plant. So the goal of our research program is to release new native Hawaiian ornamental plant selections to the state's landscape and nursery industries, and then hopefully name these selections based on provenance. And one of my pie in the sky goals is hopefully create or develop these ornamental selections so that we can create island-specific cultivars, and hopefully the sales from these plants can go back and support conservation and restoration efforts in Hawaii, because that would be great. That would be like a win-win situation. So we're making use of what we have and giving back to protecting these important plant resources that we have. So native plants that I'm currently studying include Veoveo, or Kinopodium Oahuensis, Pauhiaka or Jackmontia Vicenzis, Ala Vainui. There's a bunch of species of Ala Vainui, but I'm focusing on 2 species. The Vicenzis, so the Oahu peperomia, and then the Maui peperomia. So Peperomia Vicenzis and Pepperoni Mauiensis. There's also this Peperomia blanda, which is a very common indigenous plant. This is the only plant that's commercially available at the moment, I think. And then you also have Nehe, which is potential use for as a ground cover or as a potted plant. So what we do is we collect plant materials from the wild or from cultivated sources. If we collect plant materials from the wild, we acquire permits from the landowner. So if it's a private landowner or if it's Department of Land and Natural Resources, we obtain permits in collecting these plants. So our target species include coastal species, since most of our urban development is in the lowland areas. We are looking for plants that can thrive in these areas. So that's our target for landscapes. And then for indoor use, we're looking at shady plants that grow under shady, mesic to wet conditions. So that's the peperomias. So when we collect these materials, we document them carefully. We have GPS coordinates, take pictures. If we got it from botanical gardens, we get botanical garden records. So we collect mostly from stem cuttings because that's easiest. And we propagate them in the greenhouse. In the case of peperomia, we have problems with heat. So I keep a backup indoors, growing under grow lights and hydroponics. Aveo, so let's look at the different species now. So Aveo is Kinopodium Oahuensis. So Aveo is endemic to the island. So it's a drought-tolerant shrub or tree that's found from 0 to 2,500 meters above sea level. The Hawaiians have used it as famine food and also for medicinal purposes. There's a diversity of forms of Aveo ranging from something like a ground cover like this that's creeping on the ground, just really hugging the ground, to something like a bush. And you can see that there's differences also in color. There's more silvery ones, there's more greenish ones. So there is diversity of forms that can be selected for particular purposes. So there's no selections that are currently being developed for this one. We're looking at it as a green roof or living wall plant, a landscape ground cover or shrub, and also as a filler flower. So we did preliminary trials with prostrate and compact forms of Aveo, and we looked at whether rooting hormone can improve rooting or not. We saw differences in rooting of the different selections. So the prostrate form, which is hugging the ground, has less roots compared to the compact form, the bigger, shrubbier plant. Research indicate that we don't really need to apply rooting hormone with the compact or the prostrate form. There are differences with the different growth forms of Abeo. Now let's look at Nehe. So Nehe is Melanthera integrifolia. So Nehe is an endemic coastal perennial herb, which is used culturally as lay flower, used as tea or food, also as a laxative or as a treatment for cuts. It has been used as a ground cover in landscaping, but there hasn't been any selections that are particularly, I guess, used for ornament, or there isn't any named cultivars of Nehe. So there hasn't been any research on use in hanging baskets, containers, or green roofs. Nehe is a good native ground cover for coastal areas because it's heat, salt, and wind tolerant. So recently we collected plants from Oahu and Hawaii Island. So you can see that these are all Nehe, but you can see that there's differences in leaf shapes. The one from South Point has a more round shape, and then the one from Oahu has a more oblongish leaf shape. We did preliminary research on propagation, and we found that Nehe is an easy to root species, so it doesn't really improve percent rooting. So you can have about greater than 90% rooting. But we saw some differences with the different plants that we have. So we have higher root surface area with the Makapu'u plants, and then the South Point plants had the lowest root surface area. So in addition to rooting hormone, so the addition of rooting hormone actually improves root surface area and total number of root tips. So in one way, addition of rooting hormone can make the rooting characteristics better, but it wouldn't improve the percent rooting. Addition of rooting hormone may be beneficial for South Point because this is where we saw the most improvement in rooting. So you can see here at the top, this is without rooting hormone, and then at the bottom you have rooting hormone here. So you have improved roots, more number of roots per cutting. So currently there's a grad student who's working on characterization of these for hanging baskets. Yeah, so that's another picture of Nehe. So next is Paohiiaka, or Montia Vicenzis. So this is a coastal perennial herb that's found on all islands. So this is endemic. So this is only found in Hawaii and nowhere else in the world. And as you can see in this picture, there's different morphologies of Montia that can be used or can be selected for particular ornamental uses. So we collected 6 plants from different islands, so from Oahu, Maui, and Hawaii Island, and we're looking at it as a potential ground cover hanging basket plant. So Paohiiaka is easy to propagate from cuttings, and pests includes the sweet potato worm. It can be rarely attacked by aphids, mealybugs, and spider mites. So about last year, we published a paper on morphological characterization of these 6 accessions. We found that there's differences in terms of leaf shape, degree of hairiness, flower color, branching habit. So these differences allowed us to select for particular accessions that can be used for hanging baskets. So here's the summary. Yes.
How long do you think you have? Because we're normally at a break here, but if you're almost done, then we might as well just finish up and have a question and answer session afterwards. But if you think it's going to be a while, then maybe we'll take a quick break.
Okay, maybe quick break.
Okay.
I'm about halfway.
Oh, okay, 5 minutes then, yeah, because it looks like we might make it till 12.
Yeah.
While we're on break, though, it would be interesting to ask a couple of these questions. First off, what plants do you think are good for indoor balcony and shady conditions? People want easy care, but don't have ideal environments.
I think something that might come into mind with indoor plants, bulletproof plants, would be the spider plant or the Sansevierias.
Yeah, Sansevieria is always, if you want a plant that just will live through anything, Sansevieria. Yeah, I tend to think of it as, if you see these plants as really aggressive in a super shady condition where you live, it's most likely going to live in your apartment, your balcony. So I've been moving between Oahu and Big Island too many times, so I didn't bring plants with me. And all I do is I just go to the closest dark woodland area and I take cuttings of plants, and those are always the best survivors in my indoor section. They don't really provide anything other than some greenery. And also, cutting plants from the woods or from nature can be, first of all, illegal. So it's not always recommended, but also you almost always bring a pest or a disease with you. So just using the woodlands as a reference for the plants that are the most bulletproof is sometimes a good idea. And then, I mean, when you go to big box stores, they've normally weeded out the plants that are not successful in indoor sections of your house or on balconies. So you're often going to find plants that are surviving at big box stores, at least at garden centers, because they've been time tested for success.
And I would say also small garden stores, just because a lot of times they have more locally adapted things. Definitely worth checking out Ko'olau Farms over on Oahu, Hawaiian Nursery Landscaping. Not as these are the only ones. Garden Exchange in Hilo. You see a lot of things that people have success growing locally and typically have some local knowledge as well.
Local native plants, where do we find to get them?
We'll talk about that a little bit. Yeah, so we'll talk about that like in lab maybe. For Hilo, yeah, there's a few places. Yeah. But master gardeners are trying to become one of those sources. So we're trying to grow native plants over here. And then we had, is that why epiphytes are so prevalent in houseplants and ornamentals? And that might have been a response to a previous statement that you made from Jordan.
I think that's probably for the Talansias.
Yeah. I think epiphytes are really popular because they're low maintenance. They look alive for a very long time, even if they're slowly dying. At least mine have. As they gray, they already look gray, most of them. So as they die, they don't look as dead as a greenhouse plant would look. And then also, in a lot of cases, it's just humid enough that they'll survive on ambient humidity in your situation. But a lot of times, you also do need to mist them. And we had an interesting one over in Hilo. Jenny was asking, are you going to look for preserving and encouraging diversity, or are you looking for uniformity in selecting and propagating the Hawaii endemic ornamentals or Hawaiian native ornamental plants?
So I am trying to, in terms of selection, so a particular selection, it's propagating from cuttings, so it's basically a clone of itself. But I can encourage diversity by having different types, so that there's more, that you're not just, I guess you're not just confined to just one cultivar. So the goal is to release as many as possible, because the law actually states that wherever and whenever possible, source the plants from the same island, or even the Ahupua'a where you live. So
yeah, it seems like you're encouraging diversity by trying to develop new plant species as natives, but we got to go back to that basic botany course where a selected variety is selected so that you have the same uniform characteristics, and you can't sell it as that variety if it's going to consistently have different characteristics. So uniformity in crop production, especially in ornamental horticulture, is somewhat essential.
yes.
To be able to market it as what it is. But that's not the case all the time, because a lot of people are just growing from seed. And so there is genetic diversity while the plants are looking similar. But that's where we've had issues with at least plants I've experienced, where there's a drifting in the genetic makeup of the plants, and then what the plant was originally supposed to be, it's definitely moved on from. That's especially true in ginger. And for cut flower ginger, I mean, there's just so much confusion for what the plant actually is. Most of them are calling it, general Alpinia purpurata, the red flowering ginger, where it's not necessarily the case. Anyway, sorry, we're going on a tangent. We should get started again.
All right. Okay, let's continue on. Right, so here is the 6 accessions that we collected, and then the different colors. So some are blue, some are white colored, the flowers are white colored, and then some don't have hairs in them, so they're not as light green as it would be. So yeah. Okay. So we selected we selected 2 plants or accessions with potential for hanging baskets, because these were very responsive to pruning, because they produce a lot more branches compared to the other ones. So this is Lion Arboretum, and also South Point, and also Puhala Bay, which is a Maui accession. So we actually just submitted a germplasm release note for Puhala Bay. So we named it Puhala Bay as a Maui Island selection of Pauhiaka. So it's a nice selection, because this one has a very wavy leaf pattern. So it's still ornamental, even if there's not much flowers in it. So yeah, so this will be published probably in May. And if you have, I guess, inquiries on the plant material, then let me know, because we're releasing this for free. We're not having any. Well, it's a wild plant, so it's not patentable or that sort of thing. So these Pauhiaka selections can be propagated from cuttings. We did some research on 4 versus 3 node cuttings, 4 versus 1 node cutting. We found that 4 node cuttings work best. And then we also found that the hairy accessions tend to rot under mist conditions. This is because the hairs on the leaves actually retain a lot more water, so it's basically drowning the plants, whereas the ones with no hairs at all, the water just slips on the leaves. So if you were to propagate the hairy accessions, then I would suggest just watering it from underneath. Okay, next one is Ala Vainui or Pepperoni species. So there's varying, in Hawaii we have about 25 species. So 2 that are native, and then 23 that are only found here in Hawaii. We have varying leaf shapes and colors, as you can see here, which can be potentially selected for indoor use. It can be easily propagated from stem and leaf cuttings. This is just some things that I saw in the mainstream media. In 2018, they said that Peperomia will be the next hot plant in 2019. And then just recently, Garden Center, the National Garden Bureau named Peperomia 2022 as the year of the Peperomia. So our previous study, we trialed 4 species for indoor use: Kukiana, Vicenzis, Oahuensis, and Blanda. We tested it under 3 different light levels: window, office, and low light conditions. And as you can see here, yeah, so brighter, better looking plants, lower light, almost died. What we found with this indoor trial was that P. Vicenzis was the best performing under low light and office lighting. We found poor survival of Blanda, Kukiana, and Oahuensis. If you were to use Blanda, you can use those under brighter light conditions, so on the side of windows. Pepperomia Vicenzis, however, you can just use like ambient office lighting or fluorescent lighting as a source of light because it was tolerant for low light conditions. So we also tried propagation of these species, and they can be propagated easily from leaf cuttings. Vicenzis unfortunately cannot be propagated from leaf cuttings under mist. So we found that we got a lot of rotting with Vicenzis under mist. So we looked at sub-irrigation as an alternative way of propagating Vicenzis. So you can just put gravel or those clay pellets that you use in aquaponics. Just insert the leaves in a pot and then just water it from underneath. There's some stagnant water, and eventually you'll have rooting of those leaf cuttings. So aside from leaf cutting propagation, we also looked at tissue culture techniques. So we got good success with leaf culture. So a grad student is working on the sterilization technique and also how to acclimatize these tissue cultures out of the bottle. So she's currently doing that work. Current research on Peperomia. So we have just finished actually our research on Mauiensis versus Vicenzis, and we found that both actually can handle low light conditions fairly easily. We are also in search for variegated Peperomias, and then we're looking at propagation and production protocols. Other projects in the pipeline. We're looking at natives that could be used as cut flowers. Yeah, so we have Kona here, which is an endemic grass. We also have the Maoli, and then the Aveo. I think it can be used as a filler flower, a filler for arrangement like this. And we've done initial base life testing, and it seems like it can last for long periods. We're also looking at other Peperomia species, and I recently got a variegated Naupaka, and it gave me a different variegated form. So I'm currently propagating that and see if that variegation is stable. And hopefully, if it's stable, then we can release that we can increase and then release that as a new variety. So I'd like to thank my students, the various agencies and the research station where I am keeping my plants, then my sources of funding. So if you have questions, you can email me, you can visit my website for more information, and then you can follow me on Instagram using this username or Instagram profile. Any questions? I think I see some questions on the chat. Let's see.
Yeah, I think we want to start with Megan McQuaid's. I'll announce them so everybody can hear it also. Does USDA allow export without special plant native nursery license in regards to released plants, quote unquote? Please define release.
Okay, release meaning it's going to be available to the public. So right now there is no restrictions as long as the nursery that propagates any native Hawaiian plant is certified by the Hawaii Department of Agriculture. They don't have any restrictions exporting native Hawaiian plants to the mainland. There are rules though with certain states, so like California, Texas, and Louisiana. They need additional paperwork if you are exporting these plants to those states. But to the rest of the states, there's no restrictions.
So yeah, her question was saying, for example, let's say she wants to send one of these plants to California to see how they do in a different climate. You know.
Yes. So there's additional paperwork with California if you were to export.
Sure. Will you put up your contact slide again? Your contact info?
Okay, let me head back and then share screen. There.
So somebody's asking you, why is it so hard to find agave and aeonium in Hawaii? I'm assuming the market is there and people aren't producing it enough.
Maybe people are not producing it enough.
Yeah. I mean, if you're coming from somewhere else, I think there's a lot of plants that have just a larger market in those areas. So, and there's just less of production here in Hawaii in terms of ornamental plants, which I think is an area that can be expanded on in terms of the industry itself.
Mm-hmm.
Business opportunity.
Yeah. Megan is following up again. She says, I use the USD for export. They will not accept native or endemic plants, though, unless it's from a certified industry or nursery. She said she'll check your website. And you weren't allowed to import agave, so Megan wasn't allowed to import agave. So that's probably a big issue too, is import restrictions are making it harder to import plants.
Yep.
Let's see. Megan, maybe just follow up with Orville if you wanna get into it in terms of the import and export, because he's an expert. So you have his contact. You're probably gonna get an email or a call, Orville. It sounds like.
Or I can probably forward you to the HDOA folks.
Oh sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Barbara's asking, do you have any Hawaiian plant landscapers that you recommend that's fairly priced? Where are you at, Barbara? We need to know. Oahu.
Well, the only, like, Huiku is the only one that specializes on native plant landscaping. So they have a nursery, and they also have a landscaping services.
Although other landscapers would focus on native plant landscaping if you ask them, but I'm not sure which ones are fairly priced necessarily. The Landscape Council of Hawaii website, hawaiiscapes.com, has a Find a Landscaper portion of its website that you can type in landscapers there, but it's going to be a lot like a Yellow Pages. I'm not sure if they're going to allow it to be searched by whether or not they do native plant landscaping or not. Okay. I think we're pretty much going to wrap up here. Thank you, Dr. Baldos. That was an excellent presentation.
Okay,
Thanks, Orville. Always great to hear you talk.
thank you.
All right, everybody over the web. So we're going to go do our own individual group labs. So thank you very much, and look forward to see you guys next week.
Thank you.